An orphaned girl shared her meager meal, the simple act of kindness that would forever alter the course of her life. She couldn't have known then, as her small hands broke the hard bread in two, that the hungry stranger with familiar eyes would turn out to be the father she'd thought lost to the unforgiving world. Lily Morgan stood at the edge of Westfield Children's Home's garden, her thin frame silhouetted against the fading autumn light. At 12 years old, her shoulders already carried the weight of abandonment that no child should bear. The other children played in clusters across the yard, their laughter a foreign language she'd forgotten how to speak. 7 years had passed since the accident. 7 years since the social worker had explained, in that careful adult voice that tried to soften sharp edges, that her parents weren't coming back. 7 years of watching other children leave with new families while she remained, growing taller, but somehow feeling smaller with each passing season. Mrs. Hendricks, the home's director, watched Lily from the kitchen window. The girl had been withdrawing more lately, slipping away during mealtimes with small portions wrapped in napkins. Not stealing, Lily was never one to take more than her share, but saving, hoarding tiny morsels like a winter animal. Mrs. Hendricks sighed, wondering what invisible hunger the child was trying to fill. "Lily," she called, wiping her hands on her apron, "dinner will be ready in an hour. Don't wander too far." Lily nodded, the gesture so slight it was barely perceptible. Her fingers unconsciously touched the small bundle in her pocket, today's rescued portion of bread and cheese. She waited until Mrs. Hendricks returned to her cooking before slipping through the gap in the hedge that separated the home's property from the path leading to town. The November air bit at her cheeks, but Lily welcomed the cold. It made her feel something beyond the persistent numbness. The path wound through a small copse of trees, their branches nearly bare now, leaves crunching beneath her worn shoes. This had become her ritual over the past weeks. This solitary walk to the small park at the edge of town where the forgotten gathered. The park bench came into view, occupied today by a man she hadn't seen before. Most of the regulars, the homeless who cycled through this quiet corner of Sheffield, recognized her by now. Old Tom with his weathered smile and stories of sailing ships. Margaret who hummed lullabies and collected smooth stones. The newcomers were always the most wary, the most hungry. This man sat hunched, his broad shoulders curved inward as if trying to contain something that might escape. His beard was untrimmed but not unkempt, his clothes worn but clean. Something about his posture struck Lily, not defeated but waiting. His hands, large and roughened, twisted a faded photograph between his fingers. Lily approached with the careful steps of someone accustomed to not disturbing others' solitude. When she was close enough, she simply sat on the opposite end of the bench, leaving the middle space vacant, a buffer zone of politeness. The man startled slightly, tucking the photograph into his jacket pocket with a swift, protective motion. His eyes, when they met hers, were a deep brown that caught the late afternoon light in a way that made something in Lily's chest tighten inexplicably. "Hello?" she said, her voice smaller than she intended. He nodded, a quick dip of his chin. "Hello?" His voice was rough, as if rarely used. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with something Lily couldn't name. She reached into her pocket and withdrew her small bundle, unwrapping the napkin to reveal the modest offering inside. "Are you hungry?" she asked, breaking the bread in half with practiced fingers. The man's eyes widened slightly. He looked from the bread to her face, then to her worn coat and scuffed shoes. Understanding crossed his features, the realization that she had little to give and was giving it anyway. "I couldn't take your food," he said, but his gaze lingered on the bread. "I'm not very hungry," Lily lied, the words coming easily after years of practice. "And they'll serve dinner soon back at the home." The man hesitated, then reached out slowly, as if afraid a sudden movement might scatter the moment like pigeons. "Thank you," he said, accepting half of the bread and a small wedge of cheese. His fingers trembled slightly, and Lily noticed a thin, pale line where a wedding ring might once have been. They ate in silence, watching as the last light burnished the empty playground across the park. The swings moved gently in the breeze, chains creaking a metallic lullaby. Lily finished her portion in small, measured bites, making it last. The man did the same, she noticed, each movement deliberate and appreciative. "Do you come here often?" he asked finally, brushing crumbs from his coat. Lily nodded. "Most days. When I can." "To feed strangers?" His tone wasn't mocking, but genuinely curious. She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Sometimes people forget what it's like to share a meal, even a small one. Something shifted in the man's expression, a softening around his eyes. That's a wisdom beyond your years, Mrs. Hendricks says I was born with an old soul, Lily replied, then added quietly, my mom used to say that too, I think. Before. The man's hand twitched, as if he might reach out, but instead closed into a loose fist on his knee. Before? Before the accident, Lily said, the words falling between them like stones into still water. I don't remember much. I was 5. The park lamps flickered on, casting pools of yellow light that seemed to hold the encroaching darkness at bay. In the sudden illumination, Lily noticed a scar that ran along the man's temple, disappearing into his hairline. I should go back, she said, standing and brushing off her skirt. Mrs. Hendricks worries. The man nodded, something unreadable crossing his face. Thank you. For the bread. And the company. Lily smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. Will you be here tomorrow? The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. He looked away, toward the distant lights of the town. I'm Lily, she offered, suddenly wanting him to know her name. A long pause followed, filled with the rustling of leaves and distant traffic. James, he finally said. My name is James, Lily nodded, tucking the name away like something precious. Goodbye, James. As she walked back through the darkening trees, Lily felt a curious warmth in her chest, despite the chill in the air. She hadn't spoken so many words to anyone in weeks. There had been something about the man, James, something that felt like the opposite of the hollowness that had become her constant companion. Behind her, on the bench, James Morgan pulled the photograph from his pocket again, staring at the smiling face of a woman with a small girl on her lap. The girl had eyes that matched his own, a detail that had haunted him through 7 years of fractured memories and desperate searching. With trembling fingers, he traced the outline of the child's face, then looked in the direction where Lily had disappeared. It can't be, he whispered to the empty park. But the dull ache in his chest, dormant for so long, had flared to painful life the moment she'd offered him bread with small, familiar hands. Lily returned to the home just as dinner was being served, slipping into her usual seat at the long table. The other children barely noticed her arrival, caught up in their own conversations and small dramas. Only Eliza, a freckled girl 2 years younger, nudged her gently. Did you feed your park people again? She whispered, passing Lily the basket of rolls. Lily nodded, taking a roll and placing it on her plate. Just one today. A new man, Mrs. Hendricks says you shouldn't talk to strangers, Eliza said, her face serious beneath her copper curls. They're not strangers once you know their names, Lily replied, the logic sound in her mind. His name is James. Across the table, Mrs. Hendricks observed the rare animation in Lily's face. The girl had spoken more words in the past minute than she had all week. Whatever she found on these solitary walks seemed to be breathing life back into her. Still, concern nagged at the director's conscience. A young girl alone in the park, approaching homeless strangers. It wasn't safe, no matter how compassionate the intention. After dinner, when the children were settling into their evening routines of homework and quiet play, Mrs. Hendricks called Lily into her office. The room was small but cozy, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a desk piled with papers. A photograph of Mrs. Hendricks' own children, now grown with families of their own, sat beside a potted fern that had survived against all odds. Sit down, Lily, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I'd like to talk to you about your walks. Lily perched on the edge of the seat, her posture tense. Am I in trouble? No, dear. Mrs. Hendricks leaned forward, her elbows on the desk. But I am concerned. Eliza mentioned you've been talking with homeless people in the park. Not people, just some people, Lily corrected, her fingers fidgeting with a loose thread on her sleeve. They don't have anyone to talk to most days, Mrs. Hendricks sighed, recognizing the empathy that both worried and impressed her. It's kind of you to care, Lily, but it's not safe for a young girl to be alone in the park, especially as it gets dark earlier now. I'm careful, Lily insisted, a rare defiance flickering in her eyes. And they're not dangerous. They're just lost. The word hung in the air between them, laden with meaning beyond its simple syllable. Mrs. Hendricks studied the girl before her, this quiet, thoughtful child who had withdrawn so completely after hope of adoption had faded, only to now reach out to the most overlooked members of society. Perhaps we could find another way for you to help, Mrs. Hendricks suggested gently. The local shelter always needs volunteers. We could arrange for you to go with me on weekends. Lily's gaze dropped to her hands. Could I still go to the park sometimes? Just not alone, Mrs. Hendricks considered this compromise. What if one of the older volunteers accompanied you? Sarah comes on Thursdays and she's studying social work. I think she'd understand. Relief washed over Lily's features. Thank you. As Lily stood to leave, Mrs. Hendricks remembered something. Lily, wait. There was a call for you today. Confusion crossed the girl's face. No one ever called for her. A social worker from the county office. Mrs. Hendricks explained. They've located some information about your family. They'd like to come discuss it with you tomorrow. Lily froze, one hand on the doorknob. My family? But they said there wasn't anyone left. I don't have details, Mrs. Hendricks said carefully. But it seems they've found something in their records. Try not to build up too much hope, dear. It could be distant relatives or simply information. Lily nodded, but her mind was already racing, connecting dots that couldn't possibly align. The stranger in the park with her father's eyes, and now this call, appearing like twin stars in the dark sky of her life. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to Eliza's soft breathing from across the room, and thought of James. There had been something in his manner, something in the careful way he'd eaten the bread, that reminded her of fragmented memories. A man cutting an apple into perfect slices, the scent of wood shavings, large hands holding hers as she crossed a street. Morning came with leaden skies that promised rain. Lily moved through her school day in a fog of anticipation and dread. What could the social worker possibly have found after all these years? And would she be allowed to visit the park again, to see if James had returned? By afternoon, the rain had arrived in earnest, drumming against the classroom windows as Lily watched the clock tick toward dismissal. The walk back to the home was a damp blur, her mind elsewhere, barely noticing as her shoes and socks grew soaked from puddles. Mrs. Hendricks met her at the door with a towel. Change quickly, Lily. Ms. Bennett from Social Services is already here. Heart pounding, Lily hurried to her room, pulling on dry clothes and attempting to smooth her damp hair. In the small mirror above her dresser, her reflection stared back, pale face, wide eyes holding a mixture of fear and hope. She took a deep breath and made her way to Mrs. Hendricks' office. The social worker was younger than Lily had expected, with kind eyes and a portfolio open on her lap. Mrs. Hendricks sat nearby, her expression carefully neutral. They both looked up as Lily entered, and something in their faces made her stomach tighten. "Hello, Lily," the social worker said. "I'm Ms. Bennett. Please sit down." Lily perched on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Did you find my family, Ms.?" Bennett exchanged a glance with Mrs. Hendricks before responding. "We've been reviewing old cases, updating our records with new information systems. Your file came up in our review process." She opened a folder, revealing documents Lily couldn't read from her position. 7 years ago, after the accident that took your mother's life, you were brought into care because authorities believed your father had also died in the crash. Lily nodded. This was the story she'd been told. A car accident, both parents lost, no other family able to take her. "However, Ms. Bennett continued, it appears there was some confusion. Your father, James Morgan, was critically injured and suffered severe amnesia. He was transferred to a hospital in Scotland while still unconscious, and due to administrative errors between counties, was eventually listed as deceased when he couldn't be located." The room seemed to tilt around Lily. "My father is alive?" The words came out as barely more than a whisper. "We believe so, Ms. Bennett said carefully. "Records indicate he was released from medical care after 18 months, but had no memory of his previous life. He's been searching for information about his past for years, apparently. Last month, he filed inquiries with several county offices, including ours." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. "James, the man in the park with her father's eyes. It couldn't be coincidence. Such things didn't happen outside of storybooks. Yet the timing, the name, the familiar gaze that had stirred something deep within her memory. What does he look like?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "The man who's looking for information, Ms. Bennett pulled a photocopy from her folder, a driver's license with a grainy image. The face was cleaner, the hair shorter, but unmistakably the man from the park. "We've arranged for a meeting, if you're willing. He's very eager to—" "I've met him," Lily interrupted, the words tumbling out. "Yesterday. In the park. I gave him half my bread." The adults exchanged startled glances. "That's not possible." Mrs. Hendricks said slowly. "He's in Manchester, waiting for our call. Tall, with a scar here." Lily traced a line on her own temple. Brown eyes. His hands shake sometimes. He was looking at a photograph. Ms. Bennett looked down at her notes. "The scar is mentioned in his medical records from the accident. But Lily, he couldn't have known you were here. We haven't disclosed your location yet." "He didn't know who I was," Lily said, certainty growing with each word. "But I think part of him recognized me anyway." The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as the adults processed this remarkable possibility. Finally, Mrs. Hendricks spoke. "The park you go to, it's visible from the train station. If he came to town hoping to find information, he might have been drawn there while waiting." Ms. Bennett finished, wonder in her voice. "People with amnesia sometimes retain emotional connections even when specific memories are lost. They can be drawn to familiar places without understanding why." Lily stood suddenly. "I need to go to the park. He might be there now." "Lily, wait." Mrs. Hendricks reached for her arm. "We need to handle this carefully. If it really is your father, this is a delicate situation. He's still recovering memories, and a shock could—" "Please," Lily said, a single word containing 7 years of longing. "Please." After a moment of silent communication between the adults, Ms. Bennett nodded. "I'll drive us there. But Lily, you must understand, even if it is him, he may not remember you fully. This will be just the beginning of a long process." Lily barely heard the cautions as she rushed to grab her coat. All she could think was that her father, might be sitting on that park bench right now, waiting without knowing what or who he was waiting for. The rain had softened to a misty drizzle by the time Ms. Bennett's car pulled up near the park entrance. Lily was out of the vehicle before the engine had fully stopped, her feet carrying her along the familiar path, past the empty playground with its glistening wet equipment, toward the bench that had become her unlikely sanctuary. And there he was. James Morgan sat hunched against the damp, a newspaper ineffectively sheltering his head. He looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps, and something flickered across his face at the sight of Lily, something between recognition and confusion. Behind her, Lily was vaguely aware of Ms. Bennett and Mrs. Hendricks following at a respectful distance, but her focus remained entirely on the man before her. Her father. "You came back," she said simply, stopping a few feet away. James nodded, lowering the newspaper. "I didn't expect to see you in this weather." "I didn't bring any bread today," Lily said, her voice catching. A small smile touched his lips. "That's all right. I'm not particularly hungry." Lily took a step closer, studying his face with new understanding. The familiar eyes, the shape of his jaw beneath the beard. She saw herself in him now, connections she'd missed yesterday. "Do you remember anything?" she asked. "About before your accident?" James stiffened, wariness replacing his open expression. "How do you know about that, Ms.?" Bennett stepped forward then, introducing herself and explaining the remarkable coincidence, or perhaps not coincidence at all, that had brought them together. As the social worker spoke, James's eyes never left Lily's face. His hands began to tremble more noticeably, and he pressed them against his knees to still them. "Lily?" he said when Ms. Bennett finished, testing the name as if searching for its echo in his fractured memory. "My daughter's name was Lily. It still is," Lily whispered, tears blurring her vision. "It's me, Dad." James stood slowly, uncertainty and hope warring in his expression. "They told me my family had died in the accident. I've been searching for answers, for proof, for years." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the photograph Lily had glimpsed yesterday. A woman with auburn hair holding a small girl on her lap, both smiling at the camera. Lily stepped forward and gently took the photograph. "That's Mom," she said, running a finger over the woman's face. "And me before." James knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level. With trembling fingers, he brushed a strand of hair from her face, studying her features as if memorizing them. "Your mother used to say you had my eyes." Something broke loose in Lily's chest then, a dam of emotion held in check for 7 years. A sob escaped her lips as she launched herself forward, arms wrapping around the father she'd thought lost forever. His embrace was tentative at first, then tightened as some instinct older than memory took over. "I've been looking for you," he murmured into her hair. "Even when I didn't know who you were, I was looking." The rain had stopped entirely now, and a watery sunlight broke through the clouds, catching on the wet leaves and grass around them. Mrs. Hendricks wiped tears from her own eyes as she watched the reunion, while Ms. Bennett discreetly made notes in her folder. "There will be paperwork," the social worker said gently after allowing them a moment. "And we'll need to establish a transition plan. Mr. Morgan, you'll need to demonstrate stability, housing." James nodded without fully releasing Lily. "I have a small apartment in Manchester, a job in construction. It's not much, but it's everything," Lily interrupted, her voice muffled against his coat. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of legal requirements and emotional rediscovery. James visited the children's home daily, sometimes sitting quietly with Lily as she did homework, other times sharing stories of the fragments he remembered or the life he'd built while searching for his past. Lily learned that her father had woken in a hospital with no memory of who he was, only a wallet with a damaged driver's license and the water-stained photograph of his wife and child. For years, he'd drifted, taking construction jobs and following tenuous leads, filing inquiries with every social services department he could find. "Something led me to Sheffield," he explained one afternoon as they walked through the park that had become their meeting place. "I can't explain it. I just knew I needed to be here." Lily smiled, kicking at the autumn leaves that carpeted the path. "Mrs. Hendricks says sometimes the heart remembers what the mind forgets." James nodded, watching his daughter with wonder that hadn't diminished in the weeks since their reunion. "You have your mother's wisdom. Tell me about her again," Lily requested, a familiar refrain that James never tired of answering. "She loved the rain," he said, the memory surfacing like a bubble from deep water. She would stand at the window during storms and say it was the world washing itself clean. She collected teacups but never used them, said they were too pretty for ordinary days. He paused, reaching for Lily's hand. "And she loved you more than anything in this world." By December, the paperwork was finally complete. James had secured a 2-bedroom apartment in Sheffield, transferred his job to a local construction company, and passed all the assessments required by social services. The day came for Lily to leave Westfield Children's Home, not for a new family, but for the one that had been lost and found again. Mrs. Hendricks helped Lily pack her few belongings, both women blinking back tears as they folded clothes and tucked away books. "You've been so brave," Mrs. Hendricks said, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. "All these years holding on to hope without even realizing it." Lily smiled, thinking of the park bench and the inexplicable impulse that had led her to share her meager meal with a stranger. "I think I was waiting too, just like him." Eliza burst into the room then, red-faced from running. "Is it true? Are you really leaving today?" Lily nodded, opening her arms to the younger girl who had been her closest friend. "But I'll visit. And you can come see my new room once we're settled." Outside, James waited by his used but carefully maintained car, nervously straightening his jacket. When Lily emerged with her small suitcase, his face lit with a smile that erased years of worry from his features. "Ready?" he asked, taking the suitcase and placing it in the trunk. Lily looked back at the building that had been her home for 7 years, at Mrs. Hendricks standing in the doorway, at Eliza waving frantically from a window, at the garden where she had stood alone so many afternoons. Then she turned to her father, reaching for his hand. "Ready?" she confirmed. As they drove away, Lily thought of the bread she had shared in the park that day, how something so small could become something so profound. How the simple act of breaking bread with a stranger had led her back to her father, and him back to her. That evening, in their new apartment with boxes still waiting to be unpacked, James and Lily sat at a small table sharing a meal together, their first as a reunited family. It wasn't fancy, soup and sandwiches prepared with more enthusiasm than skill, but to Lily, it was a feast beyond measure. "To new beginnings," James said, raising his water glass in a toast. Lily clinked her glass against his, happiness bubbling up like laughter. "And to sharing bread with strangers." James smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that Lily now recognized as her own. "The strangest part?" he said softly. "Is that when you sat beside me that day, when you offered me half your meal? I felt like I'd come home without knowing where home was." Outside their window, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering Sheffield in a blanket of white that promised a clean slate, a fresh start. Lily moved to stand beside her father, both of them watching the transformation in comfortable silence. An orphaned girl had shared her meager meal with a stranger, unaware he was her lost father. But perhaps some part of her had known after all, some piece of her heart recognizing what her mind could not. In the simple breaking of bread, a family broken by circumstance had found its way back together, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could bridge the widest chasms of loss. And in that moment, watching the snow fall beside the father she'd thought forever lost, Lily understood that sometimes the greatest miracles arrive in the humblest packages: a chance meeting, a shared meal, a recognition that defies explanation, but speaks to the deepest truth of human connection.